Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down.
Alright, here we are, folks.
Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know how. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we're gonna let it away. Tonight, we're gonna let it away. Tonight, we're gonna let it away. Just like the sunrise, we're gonna let it away.
Welcome back once again. This is Chris Report, and he assured me that St. Simon's down in Boulders. Folks, this is Chris Wyatt reporting from South Africa. Hello, folks, and welcome back once again to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Chris live in central Pennsylvania on this, oh gosh, what is today? Tuesday, the 30th of April, 2024, the last day of April. Wow, let's see how many kilowatt hours I get today from the solar panels. Hopefully enough to push me into the profit against the utility. But hey, I'm not up against the wall. No ESCOM on this side of the Atlantic. Thank goodness, not yet. Joe Biden's trying to put us in ESCOM territory, though, by banning coal-fired power plants. This lunatic should go fall down some new stairs and just go away. But welcome back to the program. Today, we're doing our continuing coverage of the 2024 South African elections. And my guest is from the Referendum Party. It's Joan Swart. Joan is the Chief of Staff, if I'm correct, of the Referendum Party. Joan, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate being here. Thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure. I found out just before the broadcast that Joan, once upon a time, actually watched my content. So while I had not met her, she knew who I was. That's always refreshing. But let's talk about, so the Referendum Party. There are 31 new political parties amongst the 18,457,000 political parties running for office this year in South Africa. But seriously, 31 new parties. The Referendum Party is one of those. But this is a single issue party, although you have a platform, but it was formed around a single issue, was it not?
Absolutely. And you say we've got a platform, but it's all built around the single issue of actually getting a referendum on Cape independence. So you call it a platform, but it remains a single issue.
Well, I say that because, I'm sorry, John, I say that because in South Africa, the vernacular is communist terminology. The DA, everybody, even the Freedom Front Plus, call their platform, their party platform, a manifesto. And that word makes my skin crawl. That's what commies use. So anyway, but that is the South African vernacular. But hey, look, you guys call traffic lights robots. So, you know, it's anything can happen in South Africa.
Yeah, and even we do have a manifesto, as you call it. But it is all around the single issue. So no distractions, really. We can't afford that at this stage. We just need that referendum on Cape independence, and then things will shake out as they will after that.
Well, most of my audience, Joan, is quite familiar with the issue of Cape secession. I've covered it extensively with United Liberty Alliance, with Cape Independence Advocacy Group, and Cape Exit, as well as what is now the Cape Independence Party, Jack Miller's party, all those different groups, Heinmarks, Desbaum, and Phil Craig, all those folks repeatedly for the past 4 years. Not so much this past year, although I did have Phil Craig on a few months ago, and technically it was sort of the start of my election coverage this year. But so most of my audience is aware of it. But for those around the world who don't know what we're talking about, Cape secession comes about because South Africa, in the view of many people who live in the Western Cape, has failed, has it not? And tell us a little bit about why Cape secession.
Well, as you say, South Africa has been failing for a while. It's sort of speeding up since, I would say, 2015 or so. It's really speeding up. And we see, if we look at the most likely outcome in this election, it's going to even worsen. The Western Cape is governed by a different party than the other provinces and the central government, which is the DA, or Democratic Alliance, as your viewers will probably know. So they could hold back this bad tide for a bit, but the momentum is against the DA and against the Western Cape, because we can't determine our own policies, which is enforced upon us from the central government. So if you talk about economy, you talk about taxation, spending, safety, the justice system, our borders, even immigration is a big problem from other provinces and from outside of the country. It's all spelling a disaster. And things are worsening to the extent where I personally feel that we won't have time until the next election even, but most certainly not another decade.
Well, I think that's a fair statement you're making there. In fact, I've got to say that in advance of the 2020 municipal elections, I interviewed about 45 candidates from 8 parties, the leaders of 6 political parties, and covered it for 3 months, trying to admonish and encourage, exhort South Africans to go to the polls, because I said in the 2021 elections, if you elect someone other than the ANC, you can prove that you can govern at the local level, which is what affects people the most, for their water, their sewage, their rubbish, all those things, law enforcement, all the things that matter immediately to people can be done locally. But the turnout was abysmal. And aside from the ANC cratering in KwaZulu-Natal, that was the only major change in which the Inkatha Freedom Party gained a lot of seats. Not because they gained votes, but because ANC voters didn't vote, which gave them a much larger percentage of the vote and control of, I think it was 21 municipalities or something like that, much larger than it used to be. So the Inkatha Freedom Party has had since November of 2021 to prove that they can roll. I'm not sure they've been successful in all those places, but all these other parties I really haven't proven anything new, and they've kind of squandered that opportunity. So along comes the Referendum Party. Now, your party, it's an outgrowth of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, or am I incorrect?
Yes, it's a project that's being run under the CIAG. So it was born from the CIAG, and that's where I entered this arena as well. It was about a year and a half ago or so where I contacted Phil, and I said I wanted to help with the CIAG. And we took it from there. And then soon after, in November last year, the Referendum Party was officially launched. So it's a mechanism fitting in with the entire initiative of the CIAG to get a referendum and Cape independence, in terms of this being in the political sphere, which we thought was an important element, an important cog in this whole machine to get to Cape independence.
Well, of course, Phil Craig is the founder of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. We've talked several times in the past, and I do have a question for you, kind of off the chin, because Phil is originally an Englishman. He's a South African now, but he's originally an Englishman. What do you get when an Englishman and an American go to the Tal Monument? you get a lekker conversation. Phil and I did a live stream from the Tal Monument. Isn't that amazing? It was supposed to be with Steve Hofmeyer, but the cowards that run the Tal Monument were afraid it was politically something, so he had to reschedule his concert elsewhere. So I still wanted to get back to the Tal Monument, so Phil agreed to meet me there, and we met. So an Englishman and American meet at the Tal Monument. What do you get?
That's very interesting.
The promotion of Afrikaans. We promoted Afrikaans.
Yeah. So when was that, Colonel Wyatt?
Gosh, that was the trip before last. The most recent trip was last August. Yeah, July, August. And the one, it must have been January, February of last year. So a little over a year ago when we did that. So we did a live broadcast from the Tal Monument. It was a beautiful day. It was nice. We were almost the only ones there. It was lovely. And of course, from the Tal Monument, you get beautiful views out towards Paarl and down towards the mountains there. And it's just a lovely spot to be. So
absolutely. And interestingly enough, I live in Paarl.
Oh.
So I'm actually sitting in Paarl at the moment. So I know the Tal Monument very well. Well, being Afrikaans too, it's kind of part of my heritage.
No doubt. I mean, it's the only language in the world with a monument to it, and it's quite a monument with all those 7 pillars, with the main sources of the language, where it came from Asia, from Europe, from Africa. It's quite amazing. It is truly an outgrowth of Africa, to say the least. But last time I was in Parle, I also have a little quick story there. We're here to interview you, but I have a quick story about Parle. My last time there, I tried to eat at a restaurant on the way into town, coming from the west to the east, the main road there. And on the left-hand side, beautiful little steakhouse. I stopped, but I needed the internet. I needed Wi-Fi rather than burn my data. So I went in, and they weren't open yet. I was going to order a coffee, a cappuccino or something like that. But unfortunately, there was a hole out front. And I said, "Do you guys hear?" And he said, "No, they stole our fiber." So there was no cable. so yeah, I know we're laughing, but it's sad. So I went to down the street to, what's that fast food burger joint just down the street there? It's all over the place now. I can't think of the name. But anyway, so I went down there, and I went in, and they had electricity. They had order I went to sit to order a burger, and I walked outside, and there had been this gentleman in his truck. It wasn't really a bakkie, but kind of an SUV, with a young lady. And it turned out that they were viewers of mine. I didn't know who they were, who watched my rugby. And so he almost wrecked the truck trying to back it back onto the curb, and goes, "Aren't you the Colonel, the rugby guy?" I said, "Yeah." And so we took a bunch of selfies, and that was my last experience in Parle. So I've always had good memories of Parle, but that was a particularly good one. So sorry, a little distraction there for the audience, but
no, that's fine. You mentioned electricity. I mean, it was like 30 odd days last year that we had electricity for the full day, 30 out of 365. That was absolutely terrible. Now they're burning diesel like it's going out of fashion, just to try and keep the lights on and keep the appearances right until the election, I think.
No, you're 100% correct. In fact, and I'm not the only analyst, but I and several other analysts predicted that's what was going to happen in the buildup. But I thought they might be able to pull it off for 60 days at best, and it looks like they're just focused on the last 35, it is about 60 days when you take into account it's been 30 days already, so maybe I was correct.
Yeah. So it'll
end
up about 60 days or so.
Yeah, so they're burning through diesel at record amounts. Their budget for diesel already through April is larger what they've spent than all of last year.
Yes.
And of course, they've been gifted because so many South Africans have removed themselves from the grid. They're off grid with solar photovoltaic panels, which are costly.
Absolutely, or even partially. I mean, I'm not off the grid, but we've got batteries and everything to take us through the hours of rolling blackouts, so that we can just get by and continue working.
So, John, what got you? I mean, obviously, we're talking about some of the issues here that would inspire people to take action in South Africa and get involved in politics to try to change for the better. But why the Referendum Party? Do you think the only future for people in your part of the country is to break away from the rest of the country? I mean, is that why you got involved?
Yes, absolutely. So we talked about the 5 years, 10 years. The Referendum Party was completely not. So we've decided it is a mechanism to work along the political borders. Everything is already there, all the mechanisms, all the systems, all the processes and structures and so on. So we decided it's basically now or never. We need to make a stand now. We need to be in the selection. We need to try and get a couple of seats to drive pressure from that side as well, from both the provincial parliament and the national parliament, should we get seats there, and then continue with the initiatives of the CIAG as the sort of umbrella organization, together, of course, with Cape Exit, the Cape Independence Party, and everybody else who supports Cape Independence, and that includes the Freedom Front Plus in the Western Cape. A week ago we signed an accord with them, with Cape Exit, the Freedom Front Plus and the Referendum Party, as the two parties that's going to be endorsed for the election for voters who want Cape Independence.
Now, what's interesting from my perspective is that your party is brand new. and you successfully managed to get on this very complicated ballot. For those who don't know, South Africans are being tortured. They're going to the voting booth and given 3 separate ballots in which they're only able to select one thing on each ballot, if I understand correctly. It's beyond complicated. I think they're trying to trick voters into just not knowing what's going on. But your party is on the ballot. Is it on all 3 ballots, or is it on just the provincial and national?
We are on all 3 ballots. So the one in the middle that you didn't mention is the regional ballot, which is sort of part of the national structure. So those 2 together will make up your national parliament seats. And then the provincial, we are only on the Western Cape provincial ballot because obviously that's the most critical one for us. And you mentioned that complicated system. And you may have seen that MK has ensnared itself in this voter fraud allegations and so on. So that was most probably the most interesting and horrifying 2 weeks that I've experienced in a long time. Just before we had to get all the votes and all the signatures and everything in, because you can imagine it's like 14,000 signatures. And you've got to load them in batches to verify that the people are actually registered voters. And then you've got to upload documents with their signatures separately. So it's keeping track, and you need to do that sooner rather than later to give yourself a buffer for in case there are technical problems, which some of the parties claim to have experienced. So that was really an experience of note. But we made it. We've got a wonderful team. I am amazed. Every day I'm amazed at what we accomplish with the kind of resources and funding and everything that we have. It's absolute gold, really. And with Phil as a leader, it's just been a fantastic experience. And I don't think we can do better than what we have done up to now, and hopefully still going to continue to do.
Well, indeed, you talk about it's very akin to this side of the Atlantic. You have to get petitions signed, is what they're called on this side. It's a petition signing period, and I had to go out and get 300 signatures in order to be on the ballot to run for the office that I ran for. I did get 500, but that was a Herculean effort. I got 441 of them on my own. A couple of people volunteered and got a few signatures, but I had to knock on well over 1,000 doors because you've got to go when you can go. You can't just, show up between 5 and 7 p.m. hoping that people will be home and not eating dinner. So you have to try all hours of the day. So you're knocking a lot of doors where people don't answer. That's got to be frustrating. And then you knock on other doors and you get signatures. Now, in your case, I don't know how it worked. Or were you able, for my case, I got the database from the state or from the county that indicated who the registered voters were. That's public information. And I went and knocked only on people from my political party because that's how I got on the ballot. In your case, did you have any methodology? I'm asking because you're chief of staff of the party, so you'll have some insight on this. Or did you just go to registered voters, or did you have some methodology like, okay, these are more likely voters or people who vote? Because we can also get that information. People who vote in every election, we know that.
So we didn't have that information. The voters roll we only got now last week.
That's
and the voters roll,
you just got the voters roll after this? That's insane.
Yes. So after that, so we didn't have any kind of a clue. So we went out and we got signatures. We used the CIAG database, of course. Which is about 50,000 or so. So those are very loyal followers and very loyal supporters of Cape Independence. So we got a lot of support there for signatures and so on. Then we kind of went into the streets and family networks and the kind of thing. And then we also got signatures online, which is signed digitally. So you sign on a tablet screen, or whatever the case may be, whatever device you have. So we used a combination of those three. And then only after the fact, you loaded batches of let's say 1,000, not the signatures, the name, surname, and the ID number. You loaded them onto the system, and only after that fact, the system came back, the IEC system came back and said, okay, out of that 1,000 ID numbers that you just loaded, 700 is actually valid and registered. And
Wow.
Yeah.
That's I mean, that's absolutely crazy.
So
I mean, here I knew not to waste my time with people. Now, it's not a perfect system. People pass away. I mean, I knocked on a lady's door and her husband passed away and never been strict. So I mean, that's kind of embarrassing. But she was very, very understanding, and I was very polite about it. But our system is mostly correct. I can go find the voters. But I mean, so in your circumstances, I mean, would you be allowed to, and would it pay off to like stand around at the V&A waterfront and try to get signatures? Would that be a way to do it, or is the best way just go knock on doors and utilize your database?
Look, we absolutely did a combination of everything you can think of, but mainly we were most successful using our database and our networks that we've already obtained through the CIAG and other organizations. So that was the most effective. If you tend to go to taxi ranks, for instance, or shopping malls or so on, the verified voter ratio comes down quite a bit. Yeah. It drops quite a bit.
A lot of people sign it just because they're interested, or just so that people don't bother them. Okay, I'll sign it. Just leave me alone.
Yeah.
No, that's why I ask. So in my case, I knew that every single person that I went to was legitimate, so I didn't have to worry about that. The only thing I had to worry about is if someone claimed that I got a signature, because here you can't. It's weird in this state, just this state. I don't know how other states are, but in Pennsylvania, you can't sign more than one petition unless there's more than one office on that ballot. So for instance, like township supervisors, there might be 3 open positions and 6 candidates. You can vote, you can sign 3 petitions. But in this, there were 5 candidates and there's only 1 office. So you can only sign 1 petition. So that would be the only reason to challenge mine. But that's quite Herculean. Now, you mentioned a few moments ago, earlier in the conversation, about you've signed an accord with the Freedom Front Plus, Dr. Peter Groenewald's party. I do recall recently that I thought I saw that the Democratic Alliance basically told you guys, my vernacular, to footsec, that they weren't interested in working with you. Is that correct?
That's absolutely true, yeah. The MPC, or multi-party charter. So we kind of expected it, but they weren't interested, and they do see us as a threat as well. And while we acknowledge that they've kind of done a good administrative job in the Western Cape and governing the Western Cape, we also quite critical of them in a sense that they're not pushing hard enough to be able to decide their own policies. So they're not urgent enough to push for federalism, for instance, or even devolution of power. They tend to beg and threaten the government a little bit, but they're getting nowhere for 15 years already. So they didn't like the idea very much. They're trying to save the country, or rescue South Africa, as they put it. And we must realize as well that 70% of their voters are actually outside of the Western Cape. So the Western Cape is not their main focus, and they don't want to alienate the majority of their voters by pushing for Cape independence, which is not seen in a very positive light by the majority of South Africans outside of the Western Cape. I'm sure you heard the numbers, that 58% of people in the Western Cape, and that's a poll we did through Victory Research, support an independent Cape, and 68% support having a referendum on Cape independence to decide for ourselves. So the majority here in the Western Cape actually would like to see a referendum and ultimately an independent Cape.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that.
Yes, so they rejected it. We applied to join the multi-party charter, and they rejected for that stated idea that they want to see a unified South Africa and not it being split up.
Well, that's a fair point, I suppose, given that the multi-party charter is trying to, as you say, rescue South Africa. But it is interesting. That must be the reason why they basically said that we're not interested in the Referendum Party joining the MPC. Because, I mean, they've taken on small parties like the Spectrum National Party under Christopher Clausen, which managed a whole 5,500 votes in the 2021 municipal elections nationwide. You got more signatures than that by a figure of 2 and then some. in order to get on the ballot.
Yes.
So it can't be because you're not viable. It has to be because the issue that your party is formed around, the raison d'etre, if you will, the reason for existing, is anathema to their concept of saving South Africa. And I suppose in that context, it's fair that that you wouldn't be part of the MPC, and I think you guys, as you said, expected that to be the case.
Yes, we did. And, we make it pretty clear as well that the MPC has no chance of getting a majority or 50 plus 1% nationally. So, it's like what one article called it a dissolving illusion. And I can't think of a better phrase or two words to actually describe it. It's something that they wanted to put in front of people, and there are many people who actually believe that they can get a majority, and it's simply not possible. There's some research, and I can't quote it now, but I can most certainly send it to you. I've got the article here, or articles. It's published in peer-reviewed journals, that said that the voting in South Africa has and probably will always take place along racial lines. And there's been almost no deviation from that. If we look at the Western Cape, 2.6% of black people in the Western Cape support or vote for the DA. So that shows you just don't get inroads into changing that at all. And if we look at what the probability is in the election this year, the MPC, if you look at the most recent polls and so on, I expect they'll get around 36% or so. The problem is the ANC, EFF, MK combined, and a couple of smaller African nationalist parties, they're standing at around 64%, which is very, very close to their stated aim of getting a 2/3 majority so that they can change the constitution. And that is just very, very dangerous, and it's very, very close to happening.
Well, in fact, you're right about that. There's no snowball's chance in HE double hockey sticks chance that they are going to actually win an outright majority. But then neither is the ANC. But the problem, of course, is that you've just talked about what are really just the offshoots of the ANC. The EFF and MK are simply part of ANC. And unlike COPE will not cooperate, will cooperate with the ANC in order to pillage and get their privilege with their blue light escorts and their large salaries and milk the state for every penny it's got. That's the sad part, and that's the part that people don't want to realize. They don't want to wake up to that. So the advent of the MK Party has really, I think, made things very scary in South Africa. Without the MK Party, it was going to be very difficult for the ANC. If they achieved what I predicted in November of 2021, after the municipal elections, I said the ANC, and I'm on record, it's there. A lot of people trying to jump on now and claim it, but I've said since then, and multiple times, hundreds of times, the ANC will not get more than 42% in 2024, probably as low as 38%, and I pray that it's 33%. Unfortunately, I don't think my prayers are going to be answered here, but the point of the story is that they would have been weakened, and it would have been challenging for them to come up with a coalition at that level until MK came around. Now MK is taking their voters who weren't going to vote, people who are sitting on the sidelines, and re-energizing them. And that's something analysts aren't talking about. They're not realizing that in 2021, millions of ANC voters simply refused to go to the polls because of the insurrection that took place in KwaZulu-Natal and, of course, in Soweto. So all of those ANC voters that didn't vote, many of them now are jazzed up and ready to go to the polls because of MK, which is going to lead to a higher turnout than maybe people expected, and it's going to give MK a voice in this, a bigger voice possibly than the EFF. I'm not sure. I can't make that prediction, but I think that's possible. So if that happens, it's a whole new ballgame. But the bottom line is the communists and the race baiters and race hustlers are going to remain in charge of South Africa no matter what happens.
Yeah, and what happened, you mentioned 2021, but if you look at before 2021, at the height of the ANC, they're basically still there. It's just now split into three parties. And they're all just going to stand together. But what has happened is the EFF and the MK is on the left-hand side. So even more radical, which is going to pull the ANC through a coalition to the more radical side as well.
Well, in
So
fact, Joan, that's something that's been forgotten. Most people, no one's talking about what happened in 2017. In 2017, the thoroughly unlikable Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who was the chairperson of the African Union Commission when I was at the African Union, and trust me, she was the last person ever invited to a dinner party, the last person. No one liked her, and they were angry that South Africa shoved her down their throats to get rid of her. She competed against Cyril Ramaphosa, and neither one of these, both thoroughly unlikable figures, he won by a mere 35, 36 votes. And if it had been 35 votes the other direction, he wouldn't have become the president. She would have. And of course, the faction that she represents was collectively known as the Radical Economic Transformation. Yeah. And that, of course, is what MK really is. It's the RET faction of the ANC. And people are not waking up to that. It should be so painfully obvious, but it's shocking to me that more people aren't going, wait a second, this is just the RET faction.
Yeah, and as you know, MK has had so many problems in court cases now about their participation in the election. And personally, I don't think our courts and the whole justice system and the IEC are willing to handle a fair trial against them, because it will immediately spark violence. And the question is, what are they going to do now? Everybody is trying to hand the ball over to somebody else now. The IEC is saying the police service need to investigate this voter fraud. And you know, it's pretty serious. So people are talking about the fact that there can't be a free and fair election. They'll have to postpone it in order to complete this investigation. But we're walking onto very dangerous territory here.
No, absolutely. In fact, I did an analysis of MK's manifesto. There's that communist word again. MK's manifesto. Of course, Karl Marx introduced us to that word, even though he was a German. But the manifesto, it came out on Friday. It was supposed to be out on April 6th, they promised. But of course, anything related to MK never arrives on time, including Jacob Zuma. But it came out on Friday. And so I did an analysis of it. And that's a video that's available on the channel, folks, if you want to take a look at. It is a thoroughly race-hustling, racist, disgusting, vile, illegal, unconstitutional, immoral, and unworkable document. It's simply talking about stealing land and nationalizing everything, and our people only being black South Africans, not being, of course, it's racist in and of itself from that category, because it simply says it treats black South Africans as if they're one. Never mind the fact that they're Xhosa, Venda, Ndebele, you know, and Zulu and Xhosa, just the list goes on, Tswana. And even amongst those people, there are many differences. The Tswana have multiple tribes, the Baralong, the Bakwena, the list goes on and on and on. But they just treat and lump people based on skin color, and that's what racists do. And it's really sad to see that. People need to wake up, because there's a real danger here that we could see some sort of replay of July 2021 at some point here, particularly if the MK party doesn't get its way and get on the ballot and get 10 or 15%, which they seem to think or expect they're going to get now.
Yeah, I think they're polling around 14% or something nationally, which is really not bad at all. But they are excuse the pun, but a dark horse. You know, it's difficult to predict what they're gonna get, but it's certainly gonna be making a difference. Yes, I too expected some kind of a scenario in terms of violent protests and so on. It's now only 8 days or so ahead of the election, so all good until now. But you know, if, as I said, if the courts stand up and they say, "All right, we take you off the ballot," or we won't count your votes or whatever, then there will be something happening along those lines immediately. So that will be a very difficult thing to navigate for the provinces as a whole. And I assume the same hotspots will be there, including in the Western Cape. Now, apart from all the racist remarks and threats and so on, the one thing that we get even now are threats of violence. People want to chase us away, deport Phil, for instance, say we need to go back to Europe, and we're getting death threats as well. So it's terrible how people react, and it's supposed to be a democracy. You see, and they just know how to react in one way, and that's in a violent way.
Well, it's interesting you should mention that. Yeah, Phil Craig has been attacked verbally, repeatedly, saying he should be deported. The problem with deporting Phil Craig is that he's a South African citizen. So where are you going to deport him to? The Northern Cape? I mean, come on. It's look. I mean, the Northern Cape's not that bad. I liked Uppington, so but it reminds me a lot of Botswana. But no, it's just a silly argument by people who are just bigots and racist that don't bother to take the time. And it does raise another interesting question, because the majority population are thereabouts, about 49-50% of Western Cape population is the colored population. And then you've got a small white population, but larger than most provinces, about 17%.
Yeah.
And then the rest is some Indians, but mostly black South Africans.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, 68% of Western Cape folks say they would like to have a referendum.
Yes.
And so that cuts across all ethnicities, all languages, all groups.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Of course, lower on the black side, but to give you the numbers of the 2022 census, colored voters came out at 42%, so they're dropping quite severely. They've dropped in the past
Joan,
10 years.
is that voters or population?
No, that's the population.
Okay, all right.
That's
So that is down, but that would be
just
down.
To make sure.
That would be down not because of a loss of population, but because of massive influx from the Eastern Cape and elsewhere.
That's absolutely correct. No, and the reason why I looked at the census numbers and not necessarily voters is, of course, it's on the same. It's comparable as much as we can trust the census numbers, and we have them in history since 1996. So in 1996, I actually have the numbers here. The coloreds were 56%, so they're down now to 42%. The white population stayed around. Well, it dropped from 21% to just over 16% now. But the blacks increased from 21% to nearly 40% at the moment. And if you look at that trajectory, then the demographics are going to change significantly in terms of those ratios in the next 10 years. So there will be a new majority, and that's and if you look at what I've said earlier, that people tend to vote along racial lines, that indicates a change.
It's a pretty significant change, of course, throughout since the early history of the Cape after 1652. Let's go from, say, 1700 or thereabouts. It's traditionally been a majority colored population in that part of the country as a consequence of the intermixing of the Khoi and San with the Dutch, the Germans, the Huguenots, and others, and a few Xhosa as well. And so they've always long been the dominant population numerically in that region. And I think that alone is going to create a lot of political tension and challenges within the region for governing it, regardless of whether there is Cape secession or it stays part of South Africa. There are going to be long-term consequences if the colored population continues to drop as a percentage of who lives there, because it's going to be kind of like when I went to the supermarket the other day. I'm like, who are these people? This isn't my town. Who are these people walking in here? And not because they look different or sound different. Many of them look just like me, but they're coming from Eastern Europe. But what are they doing here? They're fleeing Ukraine, but why are they in my neighborhood? And so I think that's going to be the same situation, and that could be a potential powder keg down the road. So Cape secession, if you look at it in that light, may not be a bad idea.
No, I most certainly don't think it is a bad idea. In fact, I think it's possible, and I think it's necessary. And I want to come back to the possible side. Many people, the majority, in fact, people believe it's not possible. Now, I'm very, very sure, 100% sure it's possible. I mean, we've shown it. If we talk about the last 50 years, 81 countries have had referendums about independence, and 35 has gained their independence. So in terms of internationally speaking, it's very, very possible. It's self-determination is allowed for in our constitution.
It's also in the United Nations. It's also in the United Nations Charter.
Exactly. So the Premier of the Western Cape can call a referendum. A referendum is very difficult to ignore. internationally speaking again. So several court cases, including Canada, Quebec, and Scotland, have proven that it's difficult to ignore. And then in international law as well, self-determination is entrenched there, including secession. And we have signed some of those treaties which are also covered in the Constitution. So it's entirely possible. And people who say it's not, they either focusing very narrowly on the Constitution itself, not incorporating international law. And you need to, as you know, the law, any law, is shaped by ongoing cases and interpreted differently as time goes along.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, yeah, I've had these conversations with Phil and with Hein and also with Des Palm and others. And in fact, I've told my own viewers, if you're a historian or political science, you simply need to look around. Czechoslovakia divided into a velvet divorce into Slovakia and the Czech Republic. We saw the independence of Eritrea, which was not as pleasant, but it happened.
Yes.
We're now seeing the African Union continually push for the independence of Western Sahara. Morocco won't let it go, but they're pushing for it. And then we also have situations, instances of where you have countries that have been successful, like Catalonia. The Spanish desperately don't want to let Catalonia go. But you also have cases in which you have special governance situations, like, for instance, South Tyrol in Italy. Sud Tyrol or South Tyrol or Alta Adige, as it's known in Italian, is a primarily German-speaking region of Italy that they acquired from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And at the time, it was 90% ethnic German. Well, that got down to about 60%, but now it's back up to 66% over time as an influx of Italians came up there. And for the same reasons people go to the Western Cape. The economy functions better. There's joblessness much lower than elsewhere. Businesses function. There's entrepreneurialism, and things tend to work. It has historically had the lowest unemployment rate anywhere in Italy and had the highest GDP of any province in all of Italy. So that's what happens when you have success. People want to come there, even if it's just perceived success. And that's probably part of the reason why so many people have been migrating into the Western Cape, would you say?
It's most certainly a reason. Now, the number I've got in my mind at the moment is 150,000 a year, but it's speeding up, and it's from all parts of the country, and I suppose from outside the borders as well. So it's a problem when it's skills and people who you can't really accommodate here. So I don't think any country can really afford economic migrants. I mean, you need to plan for it. You need to build a strong enough economy. You need to encourage people who can actually add value here to come to any part. I'm not talking about the Western Cape as such only. So that's why, I mean, any sovereign country, by definition, needs borders. Not like the United States at the moment. Sorry.
No. I was waiting for you to finish there. I mean, let's just talk about. I mean, at least most of your in-migration is from South Africans. There are, the Brits, of course, driving up real estate prices as they typically do, buying homes in Western Cape. But aside from that, it's not just the Brits, but I like to pick on the Brits. But aside from that, it's mostly internal migration. Whereas here, it's a criminal alien invasion.
Yes.
It's open season. Just come across the border. You'll get a free apartment, a free house, and thousands of dollars and this and that. It's absolutely insane. And it's out of control. And it's because our country is run by a criminal cabal. And they at least we know who the ANC are. They're a kleptocracy. We're well aware of that, a race hustling kleptocracy who have somehow managed to eliminate virtually every white face and every colored face from their leadership. Look at their top 200 candidates. There's only like 4 people who aren't black on that list. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And if you go back 30 years ago, 20 to 30% of that list would have been people who are white or Indian or colored.
So I've got to ask you what you think's going to happen in November in the US. And because obviously any kind of secession also rests on international support. So you need to have an eye on where you support. Now, we are, as Cape Independence Movement, are West aligning instead of BRICS necessarily. Although I favor cooperation wherever you can get good cooperation that makes sense in a win-win situation. So, but what do you think is going to happen in the United States?
Well, I have to tell you, it's almost impossible to predict because of the malicious misuse of the judicial system against Donald Trump. First off, the man didn't lead an insurrection. That's utter nonsense. I was standing there listening to what he said. Let's march together peacefully, arm in arm, to the Capitol building to let our voices be heard. Right here in this document, the Constitution of the United States and the First Amendment guarantees us the right to peaceably assemble, to seek a redress from the government. And that's what he was telling people to do, to follow the law. This is just a whole scam. All of it's a scam. The misuse of the FBI, misuse of law enforcement, misuse of the courts. I mean, the man has been convicted and fined $453 million for a non-offense. He didn't commit a crime. There was no crime there. And even if he did commit a crime, by contrast, Bernie Madoff, a man who defrauded millions of people of their life savings, was given a $10 million bond, and he's given a $453 million. It's so off the charts that I'll tell you that Donald Trump is probably more popular today with a wider spectrum of people, maybe not numerically, but a wider spectrum of people, including black men who are accustomed to feeling under siege and, from their perspective, not being treated fairly in our system, although I would debate that on most part, but that's how many black men feel. They're turning Trump going, they're coming after him. The man is after him. So he has a wide spectrum, a big tent now. Now, a lot of Republicans who are country club Republicans, rhinos, Republicans in name only, their feelings are hurt. So they continue to vote for Nikki Haley if she appears on the ballot. They threaten not to go vote in the polls, and that could decide the outcome of the election. But all things being considered, we have never had a dumber, more incompetent, idiotic, clueless, dangerous person sitting in the White House than we currently have. I mean, how anybody, 38% of Americans polled say that they would vote for this guy. It just shows that these people are either clueless or they're dedicated party hacks or just racist and nasty people. So all things being equal, Donald Trump will win the election, and all these cases will go away because they can't prosecute him when he's president. He's got immunity while he's in office. And the bottom line here is that hopefully he can get us back on the right path. But Donald Trump bears some of the responsibility for the mess we have today. When the insurrection began in the summer of 2020 in places like Seattle and Portland and Chicago and Philadelphia, Atlanta, all our major metropolitan areas, he did nothing when federal buildings were attacked. They attacked and occupied a federal courthouse in Seattle and created their own country called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. That's insurrection. I mean, the fact they didn't fire a shot doesn't mean it's not insurrection. They declared their own political independence within our country, and nothing was done. Then when people were peacefully going to the Capitol building to protest, and some morons walk in the building while a few dozen others break in the building, suddenly that's an insurrection. It's just comical on every level. So what do I think is going to happen? Donald Trump will win this election, and this nonsense will go away. But that, of course, assumes that Donald Trump they don't try to imprison a former president in the meantime. They're certainly trying very hard. So we are on the knife edge on this side as well. This is tearing the country apart. But the good news is that rational people can see that Trump is being treated unfairly. The problem for Trump is he needs to shut his mouth half the time. If he shut his mouth, then he wouldn't have so many people that are angry at him.
But look, with respect, I don't think he's able to. And
no, he can't. He can't. No. He can't help himself. That's it. Like me, I ran for office because I was foolish enough to think that it was the right thing to do, and it was quite costly financially. But anyway, well, let me. So that's what I think is going to happen. But let me shift because we're running low on time here. And the Referendum Party, it's got some traction. Obviously, you're not going to get 1 million votes. So we can be pretty honest about that. But I think you kind of alluded to what the goal was earlier. The goal is to get some seats so you have representation, so you can exert pressure to achieve a referendum on this issue of Cape independence. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. So our goal is to get 100,000 votes on the 3 ballots, and that will give us 4 seats. Most probably 2 in the provincial parliament and 2 in the national parliament, which gives us a good platform to press for Cape independence, for some changes where it may be necessary, some bills to table some bills in Parliament, to put us in a better position to start that process. And of course, most importantly, to get the DA so that they need to govern through a coalition government, so that they need either us or the Freedom Front Plus or both in a coalition to govern. And then we can try in terms of those negotiations to get a commitment to hold a referendum for Cape independence. So that's basically the whole aim, the whole objective of even the formation of the political party.
So this is not your goal, it's not your intention, but let me just paint a scenario about how your party and this issue of the referendum could benefit. Excuse me. So with this mass in-migration and the tendency of many of those people to be Black South Africans and not vote for the Democratic Alliance, in 2019, if I recall correctly, they got 56%, and then in 2020 municipal elections, they got 53% of the vote.
That's right.
So there's a very real possibility the Democratic Alliance could drop below 50%, even though we're not going to see a surge for a party like the ANC. But if they drop below 50%, then they need you.
Yes, they need. We would be. It may be a sore point for them, but we would be the natural partner to come to as we kind of supported them or recognized that they did a good job. So, and we're not opposing any of their ideologies per se. We are single issue parties. We don't, as we said right in the beginning, we don't have a kind of big platform of ideologies to run on, just this single issue one. But we would be a natural partner, as with the Freedom Front Plus be. So if they can, and they sort of polling their internal polls and so on, showing that they on a knife edge of about 50%. So if they can go down to, let's say, 45%, which if we get 100,000 votes, that's a real possibility. Then they would most probably need both us and the Freedom Front Plus, and both of us stand on the platform of Cape independence.
Well, if in fact that happens, then we'll all be watching to see if you're successful in pushing Alan Winde and the party towards that referendum. Certainly, it's a topic that's been discussed for the better part of over a decade now. And a lot of things have changed in the Western Cape in that decade. I'll tell you were talking earlier about getting signatures at taxi stands. That's the last place I'd go. I was there last time when the taxi war started in Cape Town. Yeah. My goodness. I mean, when they murdered the British doctor, I was staying north of Cape Town in the metropolitan area, just outside Woodbridge there. And I called Avis and said, hey, do you have a plan where I can drop my car off? Because it's not safe to go to the airport. They're shooting people and there's no law enforcement out there. Now, the day I flew out, they did. It was a couple days later. And Avis said, sure, you can drop your car downtown. I said, okay, and how do you get us to the airport? Oh, well, that's on you. Oh, no, I mean, the whole purpose of hiring a car is so that I have door-to-door service to the terminal. Yeah, so Avis had no plan whatsoever. And this is after this taxi strike had gone on for about a week. You know, it was crazy. So, no, I would highly recommend people not get signatures at taxi stands. Just saying. It's just some advice.
No. I know some other parties did. We most certainly did not. But yes, some parties did, not necessarily the Western Cape, but up north. But not a good idea as well in terms of, we talked about the ratio of registered voters. So they tend to be lower in that regard. And the younger, of course, you go, the less that ratio becomes as well.
No, and finally, let's wrap up with one thing here, Joan, and that's there's a lot of discussion, a lot of hand-wringing, a lot of people who are naysayers. Look, I'm not in favor or opposed to Cape secession. I'm just covering it, but I do cover the facts and point out the things that need to be considered. A lot of people are like, well, how can they do this? I mean, the Cape can't survive economically. What about its borders? What do you do with the military bases? Well, let me just tell you how this would work, and then you can tell me if you agree or disagree. Number one, the people who live in the Western Cape, many of them have former service in the South African Defense Force or the South African National Defense Force, and are perfectly capable of forming a core basis to start a new military. Yes. The South African government can relocate its broken and not sailing submarines and ships from Simonstown to Durban or to Port Elizabeth and solve that problem. As far as the borders, there's already borders. They're pretty clear. If you go look at the road between the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape, you can tell where it starts and where it ends. Yeah. And then enforcing border security, it's very easy to take structures and create police forces. Countries have done this all over. It can be a velvet divorce. or it can be more painful. But the bottom line is that people are like, well, the Western Cape owes the central government. Actually, if you look at the figures of how much money have come out of the Western Cape and gone to the central government over the past 30 years, the central government owes the Western Cape a lot of money. Much more money has gone out of the province than gone into it. So I think the fair thing would be Western Cape, if there's secession, say, okay, fine, we just want to go away. You don't owe us anything. We don't owe you anything. Bye-bye. And that it's possible. Is it a good idea? That's for people to debate, but it is possible and it is practical. And the people who dismiss that really don't know what it means to run a country or to run these organizations. I do. I've been there. I've done that in the U.S. and around the world, and I can tell you that it's perfectly feasible. It's just, but as with anything, there'll be growing pains. And the question is, will the ANC allow it?
Yeah. So you're talking my language regarding the borders. So that's actually, in my mind, you've got a two-pronged approach. So you discourage people to try and come in by only having work for people who are legally here, medical aid, schools, and so on, for people who are legally in the Western Cape. So you discourage the influx. And then if you talk about the harder borders, you mentioned the people already expertise in military operations.
And security cluster.
Yeah. Security. And by the way, our security officers outnumber law enforcement by 25 to 1.
Oh, yeah.
So and then regarding the borders, they're all fenced, part of farms. So what you would do is you would give training to the farmers. You would reinstitute the commando system that was very, very effective decades.
No, it's the commando system was absolutely effective, and it was actually the only form of employment for the latest two regiments to join, which were all Zulu based in KZN. And the intentional destruction and elimination of the commando system based on a fraudulent claim that was a racist apartheid era institution, when actually it goes back to the very beginnings of modern South Africa before it was even a country. Just like America, Minutemen, you grab your musket, you grab your powder, you get your saddle, you get on your horse, and you defend your homes as a community. But they got rid of it, and crime in rural areas has skyrocketed. Farm murders, farm deaths, farm attacks, home invasions, off the charts, because there's no longer any deterrence in the rural areas.
Yeah, so and then you've got a border force, and you use technology, drones, intelligence operations, whatever the case may be, and it's really not that difficult. Regarding the economy, the Western Cape is by far able to stand on our own feet. We pay, in fact, 35% more to the central government than what we get back. So in terms of negotiations, you mentioned it can be like a velvet divorce or a hard exit. The ANC, and if we have international partners, they will play a role in these negotiations as well. And I can't see the ANC really not wanting a win-lose or lose-lose, whatever the case may be. If I were them, I would most certainly negotiate terms, because they can actually get something out of it. We may be willing to that 35%, let's say, sponsor them for a while or work out something to lessen the blow on the rest of the country and work together amenably. I mean, it could be a win-win for everyone if sanity prevails, and I'm not sure how possible that is. But yes. And then the other question we often get is the electricity grid, which is very, very integrated in the whole country. So that would be a negotiation as well. And then additional capacity in terms of small reactors or whatever the case may be. So that those are all very, very possible.
Well, the electricity thing is actually quite easy, not because there's electricity, there is none, but because South Africa is part of the Southern African power pool, and there's already arrangements in place, and it would simply be something that likely would be extended. It's kind of like when the UK left the European Union. Like, what are they going to do? Well, you have existing law that was suspended. Now it goes back into effect. You don't have to renegotiate deals. You already had deals. You just reinvigorate them. But as far as South Africa breaking into two or more, and frankly, I'll be honest with you, I think that there may be a Zulu Republic before there's Western Cape secession. But as far as that happening, it's not exactly unprecedented. I mean, South Africa didn't exist until 1910. It was formed by the Union of South Africa Act, a British Parliament Act in 1910. And before that, you had the Cape Colony, you had the Natal colony and the Zulu Empire, and you had also the South African Republic, and then of course the Orange Free State, Stellaland, Zoetspan, all these different short-lived republics. It's not exactly something new. So
no, it's not.
Whether it's viable or not, I believe it's entirely viable. In fact, Pennsylvania could survive on its own if we had to. We're not going to, but I mean, by the way, you talk about electricity. Of all the electricity that crosses state borders in America, Pennsylvania exports 20% of all the electricity that leaves its state. So we're the biggest export of electricity in the entire nation. 48 states and lower contiguous 48 states, and we produce 1/5 of that one state. And guess what happens? They sign us up to this regional greenhouse gas initiative and punish us for carbon emissions for the electricity we're generating for the states that have abandoned their coal mines. We are paying 50% more for electricity in this state because they are getting our electricity. It's just bat crap crazy. It sounds a lot like the situation in the Western Cape where you're giving more money to the central government, and it seems patently unfair.
Yeah.
So I haven't gone to the chat here, but there's a couple things. Someone says, "Can't believe you let her say this." Look, I'm interviewing her. If you don't like the interview, you don't have to watch. You don't like the questions, you don't have to watch. You can come on my program and ask me why I ask the questions I ask. And then also stop talking about farm murders. Actually, compared to a crime, overall number of farm murders is going down since apartheid. Actually, a murder is a murder. I don't really care if the percentage is going down or it's going up. Ignoring the plight of people who've been gang raped, their throats slit, babies put into boiling water and murdered is really just sick and twisted. Stop with your leftist garbage, whoever that is over there making that nonsense. Any murder, 80, 90 murders per day is disgusting and vile, and every life matters. And if you pay attention and take the leftist garbage out of your ear, let me pull it out of there for you, and pay attention. I said rural insecurity. Farm murders are one aspect of that. It's time that leftists stop self-flagellating themselves and start paying attention to how dangerous it is for South Africans, black, white, and brown, and stop coaching this or couching this in terms that suit your political needs. Farm murders are real, and people are killed and tortured. And there are powerful forces behind it. They're not random killings. It's not revenge for something that your granddad did 100 years ago. Those times have come and gone. Most of it's either theft or organized crime, and that's reality. Sorry for that, Joan, but I felt necessary. I saw a number of things in the chat, and if people don't like that, they can hit the road. Simple as that. But all right, so we've talked about the what you're really hoping to accomplish here in this. But the plethora of parties here in South Africa is really an interesting dynamic if you look at it. A lot of parties. The Germans had a threshold for a long time in which only a party that achieves, well, they still have it. In order to get into the Bundestag, the national parliament, you have to have 5% of the popular vote. If you don't have that, you don't get a seat. And that has kept fringe parties from being involved. But in your country, people can get into parliament like the African Transformation Movement or Black Land First or any of these parties with just enough votes because of a proportional system that allocates seats down to the lowest level. I think that's a bit crazy. I don't know your views on that. I mean, that's probably not really an issue for the Referendum Party, but it is a situation that leads to hundreds of political parties and a division of the popular vote.
Yeah, I agree that we have got a lot of problems with our electoral system, so that needs to have a complete overhaul and having a look at how representation works and what the hurdle should be for parties to enter, to be on the ballot, to enter the elections. So that most certainly has to happen. It hasn't happened to everybody's satisfaction this time around. It's sort of halfway. They tried to overhaul it. They tried to make changes, not very successful. I think there was some unintended consequences as well, including the amount of or the number of parties on the ballot, especially the national ballot. So that will, I suppose, get some attention in the next 5 years, hopefully.
We'll see. In fact, there's been a movement amongst a few political parties to try to do just that, to set a threshold, including the ANC. But of course, the ANC is doing that for self-serving reasons, not in the interest of democracy. Whereas the Germans crafted that policy in the interest of democracy before they had this proliferation of parties, because they had experienced it during the Weimar Republic. During the Weimar Republic, that's what helped Adolf Hitler come to power, which is 33% of the vote. He came to power. Kind of like my opponent in my recent election, at 35% of the vote, he's going to come to power. Anyway, but sorry, I digress. Anyway, but Joan, it's been lovely having you on. Give you a chance in a moment just here for any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience. But let me address the chat over again, because it's come up again. Please grow up over here. If you want to talk about a single issue about township murders, then come on the program and talk about township murders. I'm so sick of people show up on this program and act like the day started today. I talk about this. I'm also the only proponent online who's talked about the language of Nu, which is a Khoi language. I promote it. It's almost dead. Only one native speaker left, and that's Oma Katrina, who's in her late 80s. So stop the nonsense. I've talked about these issues more than anybody on the planet, including South Africans who are online. So if you want to talk about these issues, don't come on here and pollute this conversation. This is a conversation with the Chief of Staff of the Referendum Party, talking about why the party's running, what its objectives are, what the circumstances are in the Western Cape, and that's what it is. So I encourage the people who want to come over here and repeat, but I didn't say that, but this, but that, to come into the conversation on the news program and ask your questions there. Joan, I'll give you the stage here. Anything you want to share with us about the election, or maybe something hopeful? South Africa's a crazy place right now, and so is America, but maybe something hopeful. The floor is yours for the moment.
Well, I just want to talk a little bit about that, the comment about the murders. All murders are terrible, whether it's township, gang areas, farm murders, domestic violence. And those things can all be improved, where you can make decisions centrally for your own people and your own province. And as I say, that includes all murders altogether, whether you improve social issues, whether you combine that with a decent justice system, law enforcement, whatever the case may be, and probably a combination of all of them, and economic growth, then studies have shown that murders in all these areas then decrease as a result. As for the elections, it's going to be an interesting month ahead, and we are just going full steam ahead to make people aware of the Referendum Party and what we stand for and what we can achieve as an independent Cape.
Well, I think that's well said, Joan. I want to wish you the very best and good luck to your party in the election. We'll have more candidates from your party coming on the program. In fact, tomorrow, Robert King will be on here.
Yes.
I noticed that Joe Emilio was in the chat earlier. If I'm not mistaken, he's also on your list of candidates for office.
He is indeed, yes.
Dodgy Joe Emilio. We'll have to get Joe on to talk about that. And anyway, so best of luck to you, and thanks for coming. I do appreciate it. And we'll see what happens here. I love the polo. I don't know if they're available at Take-A-Lot, but maybe I have the RP polo there. But I'll give you a chance to drop off, and then I'll wrap up. And once again, thank you very much for your time. Kia leboa. Bye, donkey. And if things go well, my passport gets returned. It was due for renewal. I sent it in. I'm still waiting. Bureaucracy takes time. But if it comes through, I will be in South Africa covering the elections on the ground. And perhaps we'll get a chance to meet on that trip.
Oh, fantastic. I would really love that. And thank you, Colonel Wyatt.
All right, it's my pleasure. Joan, I'll let you drop off and I'll wrap up the broadcast here.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Folks, Joan Swart from the Referendum Party. And thank you all for tuning in. I do appreciate it here. Let's see. Now I can actually get to the chat here very quickly. Yeah, so anyway, a lot of interesting things going on over here. People looking for attention in the chat. I hope you got the enjoyment that you were looking for in the chat. So thank you very much. Thanks to my guests for tuning in. I do appreciate it. And yeah, so anyway, we will be back in a few minutes. If you could give me a short few minutes, those who tuned in for the news, my apologies for running over. We had a LECA conversation in depth here with the Chief of Staff of the Referendum Party, and that is Joan Swart, who was just with us. We'll be back probably in about 6 minutes with the news, so hang around. You'll be redirected automatically to that broadcast. And thank you all for being here. I do appreciate it. And tomorrow we have Robert King on from the same party. We will also have Athol Trollop on from Action SA next week, Dr. Peter Groenewald. On Sunday, we have Neil de Beer from the UIM. And Fatima Abdul is on Monday from UIM. We've got candidates. Hopefully, I've reached out to Gate McKenzie, and I'm trying to get someone from there. I have not reached out to the MK party yet, but I will. Once again, in the interest of full disclosure, we try to get every party on the program except for the EFF. We will not listen to the EFF. I'm only going after MK because they're new and it's the shiny penny on the block. But their parties are anathema to multiracial democracy, but we'll try to have them on. I doubt we'll get them. Anyway, cool. All right, folks, we'll catch you here in a few minutes. Thanks for tuning in, and be safe out there. You know, it's a dangerous world. Cheers, everybody. Well, that was the wrong link. We don't want that. What happened there? Here we go. Let's try that again.